This fabric is one of the most recent that I have purchased, but I was so eager to use it, it has just jumped ahead in the queue for projects to get made. A few Fridays ago, I showed you this sewing pattern, Mccalls M7599, and you said you would like to see it made up, so that's what we're doing today, and we will be doing View A. If you've been here since the beginning of my sewing journey, you know that I didn't always take the time to do what I am doing now, which is tracing off the pattern pieces so that way I can leave the pattern in its original form should I need to make alterations to it later or choose a different size later. And so I used to think that this was a waste of time and an unnecessary step, but it is very necessary. And it is definitely a step that is worth the time. So many things that I've made too small or too large that I wish I could cut to a different size that I can't because I made changes directly to the pattern instead of tracing it off. And so moving forward, that's what I'm doing. And here you see me doing a full bust adjustment, which is something I haven't always done, but something that I pretty much always need with commercial sewing patterns. So this is a size 16 I've traced off and done a full bust adjustment to. I'm hoping that this fits well enough. I think it should, especially with the full bust adjustment done. I am going to do a mock-up out of this. I got it for such a good deal. I think I paid $2 a yard for this, so I definitely think it's worth it to do the mock-up, and then if it fits even halfway decently, I could possibly just complete this as a dress and have two dresses because I don't want to start off using the fabric that I got on my trip to Michigan. Definitely don't want to waste it. It is so beautiful. So I'm going to get started and we'll see what happens. This is as far as I went with the mock-up, just to make sure the full bust adjustment amount was sufficient and that it fit well and it wasn't too small was my main thing I wanted. Like, I can deal with all the other fit issues later. I'm just sick of making garments that are too small. So it fit, and so I moved on to the real fabric. So I got the pattern pieces laid out and I chose my lining fabric for the dress, and this is what I'm going to be using. It's a silky lining fabric and I thought it matched well with the outer fabric that I think is called a batik when it's the same on the front and the back. If that is accurate or not, let me know either way, but I think that's what it's called. And so I got the pattern pieces laid onto the fabric and proceeded with getting them cut out. And here you see me measuring grain lines. I've started to try to pay more attention to how I'm laying my pattern pieces down and where I'm laying them onto the fabric, especially if I'm using florals or fabric with certain colors and I want it to look a certain way. That is something that I'm learning to pay more attention to, and how it makes a difference, the grain lines, in how your garment lays. So just taking extra steps and going the extra mile to make my garments worth it so that my use of time was worth it. I don't want to be spending hours making things, taking shortcuts that don't look as good as they could. So really trying to challenge myself to do better. So I haven't necessarily been following the steps in the order. I've been kind of prepping things as I go so that way I can take more things to the sewing machine and stitch them at once, cut more things out at once. So trying to do things in a way that makes efficient sense. So you see me fold the straps, and then you see me cut out the flower print fabric that is for my mock-up that I'm turning into a full dress. And then you just see me cut out the batik fabric, the skirt. And so I'm getting that pinned in place and getting it over to the sewing machine. So the next thing I did was to seam up the side skirt seams on both the batik fabric as well as the mock-up fabric, or it's now going to be a proper dress. I'm not sure what to call it. I'll call it the flower dress. And so, yes, seamed up the skirts on both the mock-up flower dress as well as the batik dress, the proper dress. And then I took both of those skirts over to the sewing machine and pressed the seams open. Also, a very necessary step when sewing is to press all of your seams open, and so I definitely take the care to do that now. So moving on, we're now going to be working with piece number 9, which is the yoke for the petticoat. This pattern calls for making a proper petticoat with petticoat netting and such. And so that is what we're going to be working on now. This petticoat netting was really interesting to work with. And so I wasn't even sure at first what exactly was proper petticoat netting. And then Serena, shout out to her, sent me a link of what to purchase. I will leave that link in the description box below for you if you want to make this. They had it at Joann, and it is just like a stiffer tulle kind of material that's inclined to poofing out to make a proper petticoat. And so once I got the hang of it, I put it down on the ground to cut out those squares, and that was a lot easier than trying to work with it on the table. And not squares, they're technically rectangles that you're cutting out, and then they want you to seam those together twice. So double seaming it twice on each side seam, and so that's what you see me doing here now. And as I said, through this process, I skipped around a lot. I broke my camera during the making of this, and so this was set down and then picked up again when I got a new camera. What you see here is the outer fabric and the lining fabric with the darts pinned in place that I then took to the sewing machine and got those all stitched in. So that's what you see me doing here now.
Here we are. I'm not sure where the last of the footage left off because that is when I broke my camera, but we got a new camera and we're picking this project back up. So these are the straps. I know that, so those are going to need to be stitched. And this is the back band and the front band. They're also going to need to be stitched together. And then we have our outer fabric and our lining pieces. So what I'm going to do is go stitch the straps to start and get out the instructions and see where we're going with this. So now I have piece number 1, which is the bodice front. And I'm supposed to stitch it to piece number 2, which is the bottom back, at the right side. And we're leaving the left side open for zipper. I want to get this pinned.
And so now I am finally stitching those straps together that will need to be turned out to the right side and gathered down, as well as stitching up the side seam on the bodice, finally.
Okay, and so now we have the bands, and we're going to stitch those together at the notched edge. So here, and then we're going to fold them in half, and there's a whole thing, but we're going to start with stitching them together at this notched edge. So here is the band. After I stitched the front and the back together, I was instructed to fold it in half on that row line and then stitch the ends together and trim. So I'm going to trim these. And then we're going to turn it, baste it, and press it.
And this is that basting, and it is definitely a necessary step. This band being such a key focal point of the dress. I think I like it better in the mock-up dress where this is in a contrasting fabric. So just a thought if you make this yourself.
So now we're working on getting this band attached to the bodice, the top of the bodice. So I had to baste it all together, and then they had me E-stitch only the front portion of this band. So I'm going to get this. First, what I'm going to do is match up my seams and my notches, and then I will ease everything into place in the front.
And so with this, you just get it pinned in place and you pull on those easing threads till it all fits nice like it should. And then, yeah, you'll just take it and get it stitched down.
So we have the straps. They have been stitched and turned and gathering stitches put at the ends. And so it says to match up the notches and then gather them down. So they're supposed to fit between there.
And so I took care with gathering them down and getting them pinned in place accurately because this is also a feature of the dress. There's not a whole lot to this dress, so the little details that are in the dress are really important, and the way the gathers look on the shoulder strap is a very important feature. So I would take time and care to make sure you're gathering those down, and even take a look at them with the pinned in place just to make sure you have it laying the way you would like it to look in the finished garment. So now I have the lining pinned to the bodice. I had stitched the lining on the wrong edge, so I had to unpick that and start over. And then the thing with this lining is you're going to leave it open between the large and small dots on both sides of the front, and that's where the strap is going to go. So that's where I put 2 pins, maybe I should do 3, together to let myself know that this is where I stop. Leaving those spaces open to bring the straps through was a technique that I had never done before on a garment, but it makes a lot of sense, and I really like that for doing straps. It is definitely something I might do in the future when sewing a dress with lining and also with straps. So with this one, you just have to remember to not stitch it closed. Okay, so I got that lining in, and now what you do is find that opening and you slip it through here. Okay, so I think I got it figured out. This is how the straps are supposed to look, sticking through the lining, pinned in place. This was how much room I needed for them to fit me well, but yours might be different. That's how it looks. And then I checked the way my straps were gonna look from the front to make sure that you could see that gathering detail on the strap. I still have some gathering stitches there that I'll remove, but I made sure that that looked how I wanted it to look, and so I'm pretty pleased with it. I made sure that they were going to be sewn the right way and not twisted or anything like that, so it's good to go to get stitched in place. And I think that pretty much is going to complete the bodice. It'll need a zipper, of course, once we get the skirt attached, but I think that will complete the bodice. Okay, so now for working on the petticoat. I don't know how much footage I have of this because I started this project a couple of weeks ago and I haven't looked through it yet. So I don't know how much footage I have of constructing this. I will say it was a nightmare to cut out. It's my first time ever working with this. This is petticoat netting. Like, that's what it's called at Joann, and I will link it because I had a little bit of trouble finding it. Actually, a sewing friend of mine, Serena, she sent me the link for the proper thing, and so that's what we have here. So what you'll do with the petticoat is it will be 2 layers thick. So you'll have the 2 rectangles that you've seamed together, double seamed at the side seam, and then you'll set the other inside of it and stitch them both around the waistline. You're going to stitch them together and then you'll attach it to the yoke. So basically there's just 2 layers of this petticoat that has to get then gathered down, and it's what makes it really poofy. And so what you see here is I have it all pinned to the yoke and I'm getting it stitched on, and this was a little bit of a process. I wanted to make sure I was doing a good job, so I took my time and went pretty slowly, and the petticoat came out really good. I'm really pleased with it. And with this make, you actually attach it to the skirt. I wouldn't mind like not attaching it, or just using the pattern to make another one where it's not attached to the dress, so that way you can use it, you know, for multiple dresses. So that's something to think about when making up this pattern, is if you actually want to attach the petticoat to the skirt or not. So now what they want you to do is pin the right side of the petticoat to the wrong side of the skirt. And that was an interesting process and took a little mind Tetris to figure out. But once I did, I proceeded with getting it pinned in place. And I used a lot of pins and really took my time, made sure everything matched up properly. And yeah, then it'll get stitched and flipped. The skirt
and the petticoat are pinned at the top, and then you even have to stitch it here. So I have a pin there, lots of pins holding it all in place, and then it gets flipped out or whatever. So I'm gonna head to the sewing machine and get all of that stitched.
And getting this all stitched in place with these skirts and the petticoats and all of this in the way, it is not the easiest task. It took a lot of wrestling and moving the fabric around just to make sure I wasn't snagging anything that shouldn't be snagged, or that, you know, everything was where it should be. And so a little bit of wrestling, but not hard. Just slow and steady progress is key here. And so I'm learning all the lessons. Here's the skirt with the petticoat attached, and now I have to attach the bodice to the skirt. So overall, I really enjoyed the process of making these dresses because I've made two. I haven't showed you both the entire time. I've tried to keep it as consistent as I could. I know this was a bit of a chaotic make, but it's definitely an easy pattern. I definitely recommend it. I had previously with Mccalls patterns done some size 18s that were too big and some size 14s that were way too small. So I think here the trick for me is the size 16 with the full bust adjustment. So I've learned a lot during this make, and you see me here sewing the lining down by hand. I'm not sure if this is how they said to finish it, but I enjoy any chance that I get to practice my hand stitching. So this was a really fun make. And there isn't a whole lot left to it. I just have to get the zipper installed and the hem put in place. And this make is finished. I can't wait to put it all on and take some final photos. I really appreciate you for being here. Let me know any recommendations you have for future videos. And so let's check out some final photos. So this very first version of the dress, this is the mock-up that I ended up just completing. I did not add the petticoat, or rather I did not attach the petticoat to this one. And then this was the actual dress. I love this dress, and it does have the petticoat underneath, and I do see the difference that it makes. Can you see the difference? But I love this dress and how I feel wearing it. I love the gray belt and gray shoes that I added for some reason. I think it just really just gives it a special little pop. And I love this dress. I definitely recommend this sewing pattern. And I definitely recommend you hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in my next video that is soon and sure to come.